Well, support for federal Labor has plunged in Western Australia, with the coalition now ahead in the West and drawing level in New South Wales. That's according to the latest state-by-state breakdown and news poll this morning. Joining us live now is the Liberal Senator Hollie Hughes and the Assistant Defence Minister Ms Thistlethwaite. Good morning to you both. Hope you all had a very good long weekend that's obviously continuing today. But Matt, we'll start off with you because the high water mark of the West was always going to be tough to maintain. But any surprise at that data drop today?
Well, Pete, every election cycle is about 80 or 90 news polls. Some are going to go up, some are going to go down. That's a fact of life. But what's important from our perspective is that the parties have a policy plan, and that's what Labor has. We've got a plan to ensure that more Australians keep more of what they earn with our tax cuts that are coming up. Our cost of living measures to assist Australians during this difficult period, cheaper childcare, the energy rebates, free TAFE, all these policies that we have in place to assist Australians to get through this difficult period.
But doesn't this poll show that that's not working?
Well, I would dispute that. I think that our policy plan is working and that many Australians know that we're doing our utmost best to prioritise cost of living. I was doing some door knocking last weekend in Mascot in my electorate. I can tell you that every one of the electors that I spoke to was looking forward to receiving a tax cut on the 1st of July this year. And they know that Labor's working to ensure that they earn more and that they keep more of what they earn. And that's the importance from their perspective at the moment. They want to know what the policies are that assist them to get through this difficult period.
Hollie, it's even Stevens in New South Wales, as we said earlier, but it's still not going to be enough to get you there when the election rolls around next year, right?
Look, the election is 12 months away. Matt's right when he says news polls come and go every few weeks, so they move around quite a lot. But I think what you are starting to see reflected is cost of living pressures are real. They know that this was a government more focused on spending $450 million on a referendum before they even seemed to notice there was a cost of living crisis occurring. They've been continually lied to, whether it was changes to the stage 3 tax cuts, whether it was the $275 that's coming off their energy bills, which we know they're never, ever going to see. We learned today that it looks like Chris Bowen and Anthony Albanese took 2 separate private planes up to Newcastle last week to make renewable energy announcements. The electorate can see sort of right through this sort of hypocrisy. And I think as we get closer to the election, they're going to continue to see through this hypocrisy from this government that's very much do as I say, not as I do, does not tell the truth. Mr Albanese promised that this would be a government that was transparent. We know the opacity that they show is just breathtaking with every policy. They've been caught out, making stakeholders sign NDAs on everything from faith groups to the NDIS consultations. This sort of duplicitous nature that they're displaying towards the electorate is really starting to show through, and electors are starting to notice it. They are so under the pump with cost of living pressures, though. It's really going to take a little while for their interest, I think, to be totally
with all of that
politics.
said, though, Hollie, I mean, why shouldn't you be further ahead then, according to the polls?
Well, as I just said, I think that Australians are so under the pump that they're not honed in on politics full time. They don't live in our little bubble. They don't get up and read 3 or 4 newspapers every morning. They don't spend the Monday morning of a 4-day long weekend in here with you. I mean, I can think of nowhere else that I would want to be. But there'll be a lot of people still having a sleep in on a public holiday because, this isn't the bubble they live in. I think the greatest fear that this country faces, and I hope whether you're a Liberal voter or a Labor voter, the thought of a hung parliament, the thought of having to deal with some of those crossbenchers still remaining there and being able to drive decisions in this country is actually a much scarier outcome for everybody. So I hope to see Peter Dutton and the Prime Minister afterwards, and I'm sure, Matt would like to see Anthony Albanese, but I think for the sake of Australians, the risk of a minority government is a very scary one. Hey,
Hollie, like politicians, we don't get days off. We don't get public holidays, so good to have you with us, by the way.
I know. I had yesterday at Sky too. Where else would I want to be?
There we go. We just love it. Matt, one of the issues that has dogged your government of late has, of course, been migration and detainees. Now we're seeing reports about exemptions of your migration laws that would include tourists, business folks, students. from blacklisted countries being allowed in. But if those exemptions are allowed, would that not mean that your policy is watertight or isn't watertight?
This has been an issue for some time, Pete. You've got people who come to Australia on visas, and we're not talking about refugees here. We're talking about people who may come on a tourist visa or some other visa, and then they overstay and they breach their visa conditions. And under the former government, they were milking the system. They couldn't be deported, and they'd end up costing taxpayers millions of dollars each year. And this government has said, well, enough's enough. We're going to fix that loophole in the system and make sure that the Migration Minister has the power and the discretion to force those people to comply with their visa conditions and leave the country. Now, we think that that is a reasonable step, that the government of Australia should have sovereignty over our borders and have the power to enforce that sovereignty. But unfortunately, the coalition sought to play politics with that last week and send it off to a Senate committee rather than putting it through the Senate. They voted for it in the House. They said they were going to support it.
Having accountability, what a crazy concept. The Senate doing its job. What a crazy concept. This is how outrageous this government is, that they wanted to ram through these changes within 36 hours. Massive changes to our immigration laws within 36 hours. No one can really say what the urgency is. Claire O'Neill did let slip that perhaps it's got something to do with an upcoming court case where, again, the government has failed in its own defence. It has made admissions, made absolute ridiculous claims that have never been made before the court before, that may lead to another 151 on top of the 147 that are already out, detainees, that this government doesn't know where they are. They've let out murderers and rapists onto our street and they do not know where they are, and they have the gall to suggest that it's playing politics. Matt, perhaps you can explain why your government wanted to ram this through within 36 hours but have not been able to explain why it's so critical. What's the time sensitivities here? Why are they tinkering at the edges now? And why are you trying to circumvent the role that the Senate is there to play? That is what happens. It goes to a legislation committee. You guys have got the numbers in these anyway, but every piece of legislation goes to a Senate legislation committee, and you tried to circumvent that last week. Why?
Matt, do you want to see?
I can tell you what the urgency is.
Do you want to see an emergency session of Parliament recalled pre-budget, Matt?
Well, I'll tell you what the urgency is. The urgency is that for a decade, people were getting away with this. They were rorting the system and getting away with it under the previous government.
So
and the new government
that is absolutely ridiculous. We're now looking at people. You are absolutely making this up.
This is not working.
No one believes Labor's
just finish your point.
tougher
We're almost out of time. Talking over each other doesn't work with our viewers at home. But Matt, just finish off your point. Hollie, quick response, and we'll have to go. Matt, just finish off your point there.
Yeah, the urgency is that it's costing taxpayers millions of dollars each year by delaying and not fixing this problem. And we believe that we need to fix this problem and stop this rort and ensure that we have integrity in our border system again and our immigration system.
All right, we'll leave it there. Matt, Hollie, you got a closing thought?
Mate. No one believes Labor's tough on borders. That is just an absolute load of rubbish. And the best part is that Andrew Giles had the date still on the briefing papers and the draft ledge on the top of the document when he tried to brief the opposition within the 36 hours. He has been sitting on this, absolutely doing nothing about it. It is complete and utter fallacy, Matt. You are just
Hollie,
either you're being lied to, the Australian people are.
We will have to leave it there. But thank you both for appearing on this public holiday Monday morning. Good to have you with us. We'll see you again next week.